Good morning. We have a great show for you today. We talk a lot about eating on this program, of course, because I am a clinical nutritionist and a chiropractor. But one of the things we don't talk about is when to eat, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But first, I want to put a little plug in for something that we are very excited about at the clinic, and that is our weekly weight loss seminar. Now, when I say weight loss, I kind of feel inaccurate when I say that, because what we're really talking about is fat loss. The one thing that most people have way too much of these days, and there's some really good, or maybe even we should say bad, dietary reasons for having it, is that we're carrying way too much fat. Our ancestors needed the fat. Every winter in particular, they would have to live off their fat for a significant period of time. By the time the end of spring came along, they were putting in their crops. There were some berries available. There were different things. And they could, start building again and be ready by the Christmas vacation, they didn't have probably a vacation way back then, but by the time the Christmas came along, they had fattened themselves up again and had enough reserve fat to live through the winter again. Well, that was excellent. I mean, when it comes right down to it, our ability to store fat is why we're here, our ancestors' ability at least. Now, though, the food landscape is completely different. Let's face it, people graze from the minute they wake in bed in the morning all the way until way late at night when they shouldn't even be up. They're still grazing, and that's what keeps them awake, so to speak. And it's just a different landscape entirely. We have so much sugar, so much delicious comfort foods and every other kinds of foods available all day long, and it becomes a very big problem at that point. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the program. But our ability to store fat is essential for our survival, and yet what we have done is we've built so much. I mean, the figures from 1985 to the present go from less than 10% of the population being obese to like 35% of the population being obese. And the ones that aren't obese are also still overweight, which means that we've got people who are entering all kinds of chronic diseases, who have actually entered it already. And then we have some that are entering those places in their lives where even early in life, the likelihood that you will be on several medications by the time you're 30 these days is so painfully high that we really need to wake up. That's really what we need to do. We just need to wake up. Well, that's what this program is about, is trying to wake ourselves up. And I have to confess that I'm as attracted to sugar and attracted to, I've mentioned on the program many times that I am an ice creamaholic. I love ice cream, and yet I seldom have it these days. And, maybe once a year even these days. And many of you will just like fall back in horror. What? I could not live that way. Well, it's amazing what we can do when we just habituate ourselves in different patterns. It really is amazing. And sometimes you have to run right up against a wall. And we'll talk a little bit about walls in a little bit. But first, for those of you who have listened to the radio program for a while, you know that we are heavily involved in what is called a functional health. A lot of people call it functional medicine. I like to call it functional living, if you will. And that has to do with finding out exactly how to deal with your health issues in a way that, rather than covering the problems and kind of loading all kinds of things on top of it, it's like you stink but you wear a lot of perfume, so to speak, or you have a problem with weeds, but you're going to just go in there and decimate your lawn with all kinds of toxins and poisons that your pets may have to suffer from, get cancer from and everything else. But rather than actually dealing with the root problem and attacking the problem directly, what we do instead is we just kind of like don't worry about whether or not what we're doing is contributing to the problem. And so when you deal with functional medicine, it's a whole different mindset. It's kind of reconditioning yourself or looking at things differently in terms of finding out really what's the cause. And one of the things that we do in the practice when I'm doing my lectures on weight loss is we can contrast different approaches to health. One of the approaches is that you have high blood pressure, you take high blood pressure medication. And so there are two questions. The first question is, do you have high blood pressure? Answer, yes. So the next question is, what medication can I take to lower the blood pressure? That's a very simple model, no question about it. And it's kind of convenient, and you don't have to change anything else in your life. All you have to do is take a pill, a diuretic or a beta blocker or whatever. And then you kind of adjust the physiology with chemistry, and that is the great hope of modern medicine, so to speak, to be able to do that. On the other hand, there's another kind of question you can ask. Rather than just the first question, do I have high blood pressure? Second question, what medication can I take? You have a little different type of question involved. Do I have blood pressure, high blood pressure? Answer, well, yes, it is outside of normal. Next question, I wonder what good reason the body has for raising the blood pressure. Now, many of you will kind of like, what? That's crazy. That's a stupid question. It's already been identified as high, and we know there are risks to having high blood pressure. Why would you ever even think of asking what good reasons are there for having high blood pressure? And the answer comes back from any doctor who thinks this way. And by the way, the person you're listening to right now thinks that way. The right answer is, well, let's find out really what's behind the whole thing, what's causing it. For example, when a person has an extra 100 pounds, they have an extra 700 miles of blood vessels to push blood through. Now, how are you going to do that? Are you going to grow a couple extra hearts? That might enable you to keep your blood pressure down. You'd grow an extra heart just for the fat circulation, and then you can keep the blood pressure down. But of course, we don't do that. We can't do that. So what's the only choice? The only choice is to have that one heart you have fill more, pump harder, push that blood out of the heart at a higher pressure to push all the blood through the extra 700 miles of blood vessels that are required in the extra fat that you've got. Well, you see, all of a sudden now the question is, why wouldn't you have high blood pressure if you have that extra 100 pounds of fat? It would be actually dangerous not to have it, because those fat cells are going to get sick from not having enough oxygen, not having the proper amount of food, not being able to get rid of their waste products, not being able to get rid of the carbon dioxide, to exchange it and put the oxygen back in. That whole breathing cycle that all of our cells need wouldn't be able to function properly. So it's very important to realize that question, I wonder what good reasons the body has for elevating blood pressure. You have to realize that is the functional question. The other question, what medication to use, that's the how do I cover the symptom question. How do I avoid having to face the real issue here? That's the question that is asked by that second question in the medical office. So if you want to find out what's really going on, then you go to somebody who asks the hard questions, the questions that says, I wonder what good reason is. And interesting, isn't it, that the assumption there is that the body is brilliant. The body is brilliant. And why wouldn't you assume that? I mean, how could you not assume that? I mean, think about it. You've got an egg cell and a sperm cell. They come together. You have a full set of genetics then. And at that point, the cell starts to divide, and it forms a blastocyst, and then it becomes an embryo, and then it becomes, a little a fetus, and then it becomes a baby, and it just keeps growing into something that can eventually not only function in the world with a lot of help at first, but function in the world independently to some extent, and then all of a sudden it's got a brain that's big enough that it can actually reflect back on itself. And I mean, my God, this is just an absolute, total miracle. And at the very, most naturalistic, it's so highly unlikely you would never even imagine that could happen. Of course, you have to be able to have the kind of a brain that could imagine before you could not imagine it happening. It's just absolutely mind-bogglingly incredible and totally unlikely. So why would you think that the way that nature put us together, the way that God composed us, is not something that is just absolutely incredible? Of course you should say, well, let's just kind of try to do it the way the body does it first. Let's ask, I wonder what is behind this blood pressure, this high blood pressure. I wonder, how smart the body is to raise blood pressure in a situation where it's required. You see, that all of a sudden becomes, when you think about it that way, that becomes not only the assumption that the body is incredibly intelligent, is like the natural assumption. Of course, you would assume that first. You don't automatically say, well, the body's pretty stupid for raising your blood pressure. I mean, my gosh, of course we're going to hide that symptom by putting medication in there and lowering the amount of fluid in the body and making this adjustment and that adjustment chemically, because obviously we're a whole lot smarter than the body is. So just that's the contrast. Okay, so functional health is something that I think is extraordinarily important. That should be the first line of health. That should be the first thing we do whenever we find something is not going quite the way we like it. Now, in light of that, we're going to go into when to eat, what time of the day to eat, and why. Okay, if you're not getting the greatest results in terms of weight loss, if you're not getting the greatest results in terms of you just keep putting on more and more and more weight, more and more fat, you might want to be especially attentive here and pay close attention, because there's some new research out. You can actually, if you want to go on the internet and find it, there's a summary of much of it by Rhonda Patrick. I've mentioned her before. She's a nutritional scientist, a physiologist, and she is just really, really good, and is currently on YouTube. And she talks about when to eat, what time of the day to eat. And what she does is she points out that in the morning when you eat and you measure blood sugar, the blood sugar spike, if you're a healthy person or if you're only pre-diabetic, et cetera, rather than deep in diabetes, that becomes a special problem. But and even that can be an important thing to kind of look at. But when you eat earlier in the morning, or when you first get up, you make breakfast, 20 minutes, half an hour later, you're eating. What happens during that time of the day is your blood sugar doesn't go up as much as if you eat later in the evening. And there's a significant difference. Now, why is that important? Well, one of the things that's important is that if we're going to eat sugar, we want to get that sugar into the muscles and into the brain where it's going to be utilized. Because if you have too much blood sugar in your blood, in fact, if you have more than a teaspoon of sugar in your blood at any one time, more than a teaspoon of glucose in the blood, your body is going to take steps to actually throw that into either storage as glycogen or storage as fat. Why? Because we all know, or most of us know anyway, particularly if we know anybody who's diabetic, if your blood sugar goes above a certain level and stays there, you could die. Now, there are some kind of things that happen first, like sometimes coma and sweating, et cetera, but if it stays there too long, you could die. Or if it goes too low and stays there too long, you could die. So these are emergency situations. Sugar in the blood in too high levels is a very dangerous thing. So what happens? Well, our body lowers the blood sugar by injecting insulin into the system from the pancreas. It injects the insulin in the system. That is a key. The insulin is a key that unlocks the cell membrane and allows the sugar to go into the muscle cells and into the brain cells where it can be burned to produce energy. All right? Now, when it's burned as energy, it's fine, then we're good. If the blood sugar goes back to the normal level in the bloodstream, below a teaspoon, we're fine. But if you don't have that insulin available, then the blood sugar rises and can cause all kinds of other problems. Well, it turns out that when we're eating a normal, good quality breakfast with lots of fiber, good quality protein, etc., along with some carbs, in the morning, our blood sugar stays relatively stable because the insulin is available to get that sugar into the cells where it can be burned as energy. And in the morning, too, there's all kinds of reasons why we burn sugar as energy much more efficiently. We also burn fat more efficiently during that time. But throughout the day, if you eat late at night, like, for example, if you eat, within a 3-hour period before you go to bed and you have sugar during that time, then you've got problems, because what happens then is a new hormone is in the picture called melatonin. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works. But melatonin is a hormone, and that usually will reduce the amount of insulin that is ejected from the pancreas. And as a result of that, your blood sugar spikes. It goes high. And as it goes higher, then it becomes more dangerous. And by the way, you will store more fat, because to save your life, so to speak, from high blood sugar, it will put more fat into storage. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this, because what it depends on is what is called the circadian rhythm. Now, a lot of you know what the cicadas are. They're the beetle that, when in the summertime, it's coming up. I don't know if this is one of the years or not, but they are just make a horrible racket at night and keep us in the Midwest awake at night if we have our windows open. And they're really, really loud. And they do it by rubbing their back legs together, and their exoskeleton is very resonant, and therefore they're just like a little cello there, that when they rub their legs together, it just screams out this horrible noise. And they, of course, love it. But why are they called circadian? Well, because they have a cycle, and I forget exactly what the cycle is, but it's something really strange, like they lay their eggs, and those eggs don't actually hatch and develop into a new insect for years. I think it may be 7 years, something like that, maybe more. But it's a cycle. And so the name of a continuous cycle that can be identified is called a circadian cycle. Now, what significance does that have with us? Well, we have lots of different circadian cycles. One of them is a sleep-wake cycle. Namely, we sleep a certain number of hours every day, and we're wakeful for a certain number of hours every day. And those cycles are largely governed by the light in the day. What happens is we get a bright blast of orange and yellow light in the morning as the sun's coming up, and that wakes us up. That gets a whole cycle going in our body. And then at night, as things start getting dusk, and that light starts going away, and the blue light from the sky starts going away, and we get a beautiful sunset, that starts in another set of hormones going on our body, which gets us ready to sleep. It gets us ready to rebuild our body, etc. So these cycles, this circadian rhythm that happens on a daily basis, actually governs many of the hormonal patterns and our health patterns. So how does this relate to our storage of fat and our propensity toward diabetes and things like that? Well, the latest research shows this, that melatonin, which is the hormone that rises as we get toward sunset, as we get toward bedtime, has a strong effect on our pancreas, on the organ that puts insulin into the system and lowers the blood sugar. In fact, what it does is it impairs the pancreas. It lowers pancreatic function so that we don't put as much insulin into the system. Now, there's a good reason for that. The good reason is that at night, we actually switch from sugar metabolism to fat metabolism. Why? Because we're not supposed to have eaten real late. We're not supposed to be getting up in the middle of the night and eating things. We're supposed to be sleeping. We're supposed to be healing our bodies. Why? Because all day long, we used things, we broke them down, we worked hard, we damaged muscle, et cetera, and all night long in that sleeping state, the melatonin comes up, puts us to sleep, and wakes our immune system up. And our immune system just goes crazy healing things. It just loves it, because at that particular point, what happens is that everything is just relaxed and ready to go. The blood flow is good. Everything is going. Our brain actually gets washed out every night as we lay in our bed, particularly on our left side, by the way. Our brain kind of shrinks back and allows fluid to come in and washes out all the junk that's been accumulating all day. And those times of sleeping are so vital because they actually help us renew ourselves. And then what happens toward the morning is our melatonin goes down. And as it goes down, the cortisol comes up. And cortisol is an anti-inflammatory. In other words, it puts the immune system to sleep and gets us ready for action, gets us ready to wake up and be alert the whole day. And at that point, our insulin goes up. Whenever we eat something, our insulin goes up because at that point we need that blood sugar in our muscles. We need it in our organs. We need it in our brain so we can wake up, be alert, and start working again. Start preparing ourselves for the day. Start getting going so that we can prepare ourselves for times when we, in the future, where we need to have stores built up and we need everything all set up. That's the time to work, right? It's time we feel good with working. Now, these are the cycles. If we don't respect the cycles, things start to go haywire. And one of the ways that our society has gone haywire, principally because of technology, this wonderful technology you're listening to right now is part of it, maybe, because some of us stay up late and listen to radio or stay up late and watch television. We have these blue lights flashing. Notice the black background in a lot of programs is blue. Blue lights flashing in our eyes and things and keeping us from putting out the right amount of melatonin to get us to sleep, to get us healing. All of these things are so vital, and I want you to remember them and respect the intelligence of the body because that's what keeps us going. We'll talk to you next week. Call the clinic for more information. Bye-bye.